scheduled start time. Welcome to the EMU working group meeting at IETF 110. I'm Joe Salloway, and Mohit is also here as co-chair. I want to thank everybody for attending this meeting in whatever time zone you happen to be in. First thing we'll do, we'll spend just a few short moments on the note well. I think most people are probably aware of it, but we'll leave it here so you can take a look at it to understand the IPR policies of the IETF. Today we have a reasonably full agenda, but I think we'll be able to get through most of it during this meeting. So we do have some volunteers for minutes. If people could also monitor the Jabber room, just in case the chairs can't get to it in time, and let us know if somebody has a question that needs to be put to the mic. Blue sheet, since you've signed in through the data tracker, everybody should be signed in, and there shouldn't be any need to have any additional blue sheet tracking. When you get to the mic, please state your name and always keep it professional. So for the agenda today, we'll start out with a little bit about the document status of our current working group documents. Then we'll have an update from the hackathon from Alan DeCock, and then we'll have IETF 1.3 discussion, which has probably been the most active on the list. Another discussion on TLS-based EAP methods, and then a discussion on RFC 3748 BIS. Did anybody have any other items they wanted to discuss? I think Roman, do I need to do something here? Oops. Go ahead.
Yeah, if we have a little bit of time at the end, which it looks like we will, could we review the milestones? I believe all of them are in the past, so we can give a better sense to the community where we are with things.
I think that's a good idea. Hopefully we'll have time. All right. I think our next topic will be update from the hackathon from Alan.
Should we go through the document status?
Oh, document status, thank you. Good idea.
I think it was just on the next slide.
Yeah, I know, I gotta get back to where I was. Sorry. All right. All right, document status. So we have in the RFC editor queue, the large, using EPLS with large certificates draft. We have requested publication for EAP Noob. For EAP AKA Prime, I believe we're waiting on some 3GPP coordination. Do you have an update on that, Mohit?
Yeah.
Or Yari?
Yeah, maybe I can say so some discussion has been going on some specific issues. If Vesa is on the call, he might actually be able to give a more detailed summary if we want to go into details, but the short summary is that discussion has been ongoing and some things have been fixed on their side and our side. And they have also wanted to have a call to discuss this on March 17th, and we can send some of the call parameters to the list after this call. Yeah, I think that's roughly the status. So hopefully this is going to be done soon.
Great, thank you. And then the other news is EPLS. We brought that back into the working group. to finish discussion and finalize the remaining issues in that document. Along with that, we have TLS-based EAP types. That is an ongoing, very related document that's in the working group. And then there's also EAP, aka PFS, which hopefully we'll be able to pick up as some of the other items complete. Any questions or additional comments? All right, then. Let's go to the implementation report. Alan, are you on the line? I thought I saw you.
Okay, so if we go to the next slide, officially speaking, the major implementers are involved. That being said, there's some caveats I'll get into later. Testing is based on -13 for the simple reason that that's what the initial tests were based on, November, December. And the desire to make sure that any new participants test existing code and we don't have disagreement about what's done where. The implementations tested in the end were client, Microsoft and WPA supplicant, and server, FreeRADIUS, and host IP. So if we go to the next slide, we tested EAP TLS, PEEP, TTLS. The short summary is it should be pretty straightforward to add TLS 1.3 support with minimal code changes, presuming that the TLS layer is already abstracted out. So for the FreeRADIUS side, it was no more than 100 lines, 200 lines of code just to tweak some things. The main issue is EAP TLS is relatively straightforward. PEEP and TTLS have a lot more issues. It is essentially impossible to control the OpenSSL state machine. You sort of throw things into it and stuff happens and you hope for the best. It's very difficult to say, this is what I want to have happen now. There are some APIs which are only available in OpenSSL 3, which is not yet publicly released. And those APIs would help us control the TLS 1.3 stuff a lot more. So things like, in some cases, even though there's application data ready, for some reason it doesn't come out of TLS, and then these TLS handshakes go back and forth after the session has been initialized and the initialization steps have been finished, but before the application data comes out. And so this confuses the various state machines, which expect one thing to lead into the other, right? Because in TLS 1.2, the assumption was that once the TLS finished message comes out, that all the TLS negotiation is done. And this is no longer true with TLS 1.3. So I either have to update the implementations to control TLS more or be more flexible about what's coming in the packets. So if we go to the next slide. So things like, especially in OpenSSL, a lot of the API calls are configuration, allow this versus do it now. So it is basically impossible in OpenSSL 1 to actually send a new session ticket when you want to send it. You can just say allow 0, 1, 2, 3, whatever, and OpenSSL at some point, perhaps when it decides, will send those session tickets. So as a result, TLS 1.3 can't really be deployed with OpenSSL 1 right now, unless we do a fair amount more interoperability testing and tweaking of the various APIs. it might not be possible with OpenSSL 1. We still have to go figure that out. So interoperability mostly works, but there are corner cases which are unpleasant and still have to be worked out. Next slide. Yeah. So for PEEP and TTLS, we see these session tickets coming from the server all alone in a packet after the TLS finished, before the application data. And so the hope is to fix that. My personal preference is I don't want to see the clients updated to allow this kind of behavior because it seems unfriendly. Like if application data is ready, just send the application data. But as I was saying earlier, it's not clear that this is possible with OpenSSL 1. So we might have to work on that description a bit in the standards. Next slide. Yeah, the implementations currently will send and store one session ticket. It's not clear whether or not more than one is necessary or why. And then in terms of other implementers, I've been in touch with the Apple team, both at the higher layer network architecture and the implementation team. Zero feedback from them. Cisco's looking at it in more detail in the coming weeks and should have more feedback. So the hope is before we get this published that more than a couple of implementers look at this and sign off on it. I'm not sure what TLS library Apple's using. Historically, it was OpenSSL. I think they've swapped to their own one. So that may come with more implementation issues, as with Cisco. Next slide. So we tested both the close notify and one application octet data, one octet application data. So these are client and server configurable flags. The application data is preferred. It generally seems to be not just easier to implement as noted here, but it seems to fit the state machine model better, right? Overloading TLS signals to mean EAP state seems a little imperfect, I guess. And the feedback from the TLS working group was that using the application data to signify TLS state changes was also wrong. But if we're instead using the application data to signal EAP state, that seems more in line with everyone's concerns. So the key exporters are still -13. Nobody really cares what those are, whether they're -13, -14, or something else. It's a small amount of code. But as noted here for the close notify, it seems difficult to convince the TLS layer to send this close notify. And so there's also some spelunking to do in TLS application interaction for PEEP and TTLS. So next slide. I think that's it. Is it the last slide? Yeah. So in short, it mostly sort of works. I don't think anyone's confident enough in anything other than EAP TLS to say that it's production ready. So EAP TLS with the application data seems to be pretty robust. On a similar note, PEEP and TTLS, at least for resumption, are robust, but PEEP and TTLS and other methods are a little more up in the air, I guess, in terms of production status.
Thanks, Alan. So maybe I can ask so some questions. So thanks first for this excellent summary. Um, and some of these things we'll probably discuss again when John is going through the ETLS 1.3 updates. So one thing, I guess, as a working group, we need to, I guess, consider or answer is how much do we want to tie up to OpenSSL, because I think that is definitely the predominant library used by most implementations out there. But at least in some cases, OpenSSL provides features which other libraries currently don't, and I'm not even sure if they are planning to add them in the future. Uh, and I know like WPS Supplicant, for example, provides some way of using Wolf SSL instead of OpenSSL. Obviously, it doesn't have all the features. So, for example, on this number of session tickets, one worry I have is I actually agree with you that in most cases just issuing one ticket makes sense. It's more like for the web scenario where you'd want to issue more tickets, but it's something that I'm afraid some libraries don't even allow. So at least on the GitHub issue that we are discussing in ETLS, which is issue 48, I posted a link to Boring SSL, for example, where the library has hard-coded 2 tickets. Obviously, you could change that to 1 and recompile the library, but it takes some effort. So, and we can come back to the exact wording, but maybe something along the lines of should issue 1 session ticket, or and not going with must might make sense. I don't know, what's your opinion on that?
Sure. I mean, in the principle of be conservative in what you send and liberal in what you expect. It really is a hard question to figure out exactly where that boundary is between implementation support and theoretical behavior. Practically speaking, OpenSSL 3 won't be released for a while. Even when it is released, I don't expect many of the open source operating systems to upgrade to it because it has API changes. It's mostly compatible, but it has API changes and requires additional application work. So realistically speaking, we're stuck with OpenSSL 1 for the foreseeable future. If we can get everything working with OpenSSL 1, that's great. If not, we're going to have to add note saying, by the way, some libraries are broken and you just have to put up with it.
John?
Yeah, I was thinking about session tickets. I think one reason why you would like to send several session tickets in ETLS would be to remove one round trip during resumption. You could send several in the initial handshake and then skip sending tickets in the resumption. Not saying that you must do that, but I think it might be good to allow the flexibility.
Sure. I mean, it's one of these things, whatever works. The other question is, and this is more policy, but is related. What do you do about resumption across different media? So if you have Wi-Fi and wired both configured for EAP, should you be allowed to resume across that? Should you be allowed to use the same session ticket? Everything, including 5216 and everything else in EAP, is completely silent on this topic. And that is related to the number of session tickets. If you do Wi-Fi and then presume that you will be resuming on Wi-Fi and perhaps also on Ethernet, there you may want 2 session tickets.
So I guess maybe the summary here is that we need to like say that in most cases one ticket is enough, but there might be cases where you might send more than one session ticket, whether it's to save the round trip during resumption or because of limitations of APIs in some TLS libraries. And then you need to make appropriate provisions on the client side, either to ignore the extra that you get, or then have a database where you can store several and save during resumption. Would that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, and the related issue is, because the application is not really in control of when those session tickets get sent, there may be early session tickets sent before the TLS finished, which are then not usable. And they're only implicitly not usable. There's no explicit, hey, by the way, the session ticket I sent you doesn't work. So now you have to add more code to the client side saying, oh, I got a session ticket before the TLS finished, therefore I have to throw it away and only use the session ticket which came after that. And it's not even clear that the client gets notified of this, right? Because that is an ordering which is in the TLS stream, but not necessarily available via the TLS API to the client.
I think that session tickets sent with the finish can be valid. I don't see a strict reason why. I know I wrongly said that such tickets was not valid before on the list, but that I think is wrong. I think there's no direct reason why such ticket would be invalid anymore.
Okay. Yeah, the main thing for me is I'm not a TLS 1.3 expert, and 8446 seems to be less than clear as to when those session tickets come out. After the TLS finished, the session tickets do depend on that, but are there earlier ones? Possibly, I don't know. But this is something, before we put it into production, we need a definitive answer from somewhere. Either this state will not happen, or you have to be aware of this state and work around it on the client side.
Okay, George?
George, yeah, Jorge. Yeah.
Hi, I'm the implementer from Microsoft. I think the main issue that Alan is speaking about with early session tickets is mainly before the client certificate is validated by the server. So any session tickets sent before that are valid in TLS, but you would not want to actually accept those if the EAP negotiation ends up failing because the client certificate is rejected. And so both clients and servers need to have some awareness that that can happen.
Yeah, and this was a source of issues in the past. Is one of these, I can't help but feel at least partially responsible for the software I wrote, where OpenSSL would cache these session tickets by default, send them out whenever, and then it was possible using EAP-TLS or PEEP for the client to start the TLS session, not send the password, get the session ticket, hang up, and then resume that session because of that internal TLS cache in OpenSSL. So as an application using OpenSSL, we have to jump through all kinds of hoops to say, oh, no, OpenSSL, don't do that. And then there's all kinds of ordering issues of, OpenSSL wants to do something and we have to catch it and stop it and cache in our internal cache for later. So yeah, it is definitely an issue.
I just wanted to check. So we have seen implementation send session tickets early with the server finished? Is that something we've seen, Alan, or any of the other implementers?
I haven't seen it. I'll let George speak. I don't think he's seen it either, but it does seem to be, at least in our interop testing, it does seem to be allowed, and the OpenSSL code is not at all clear. So what OpenSSL does is something that I tend to run away from.
George? Or George, do you prefer Jorge or George?
I prefer Jorge, but either's fine.
Jorge.
Thank you. I don't think we saw it with EPTLS, but it was, this scenario was something we did see in the PEEP and TTLS testing. So we had difficulty, as Alan was mentioning, controlling OpenSSL's behavior. Long before PEEP was finished, OpenSSL was wanting to send session tickets, and so we were fighting with it to prevent it from doing that, or try to prevent it from doing that. I don't think we saw it with EPTLS.
TLS is rather a lot simpler and straightforward. And this is, to reference Jorge's comments about fighting with OpenSSL. Yeah, it's impossible to say, please send a session ticket now. You can either send 0 tickets, 1 tickets, 2, 3, 4, but you have absolutely no control over when they're sent. And you would hope that if you said, hey, please don't send any session tickets, oh, now the session is established, please send 1, that somewhere in the OpenSSL state machine would realize that it could send them. That does not appear to be the case. So there were patches from Ben for OpenSSL 3 where an application could say, send it now. But as I was saying earlier, that is not in OpenSSL 1, which is effectively what we have to live with for the foreseeable future. And to address John's comment, or sorry, Mohit's comment, to think about host AP. Yeah, they have 3 or 4 TLS implementations, OpenSSL, WolfSSL. They have their own internal TLS implementation, but the functionality there is relatively limited. So again, it's one of these, we're not sure that the requirements we would like are possible to implement without substantial changes.
Okay. Watson? Oh, we don't have your audio yet.
Hello, Watson Ladd, Cloudflare. All right, it looks like it went through. Great. I just want to comment, if you are building around OpenSSL specifically and changing your standard to modify it, please don't. Because what's happening here is the terrible design of OpenSSL is influencing these standard choices and ends up restricting what TLS can do and then slowing the adoption. It's just bad for the whole ecosystem. OpenSSL is bad for the whole ecosystem. Please, as someone who works a lot with TLS, please make it possible for us to evolve TLS independently of something that gets sad every time I have to look at its code.
Sure. My point from a practical standpoint is we're stuck with it. There are huge swaths of the ecosystem that will not be upgrading to OpenSSL 3 for quite a while. So the decision here is, how little can we change the standard or the recommendations to allow the standard to be implemented with OpenSSL 1 without breaking things too much. Some of this may be as simple as recommending that you just write more code to work through all these other states and say that all these other states are possible, wave your hands, due to TLS library issues. And TLS 1.3, as I was saying earlier, is a substantial change from TLS 1.2. And so it may just be, hey, if you get something, keep the TLS conversation going, even if you get a packet. Even if you get TLS finished, you act that, you get a session ticket all alone. When you expect application data, it's still negotiating. You should still continue. Sorry about this. It really shouldn't happen, but that's it. Same thing with the number of session tickets. If you can't control when they get sent out, pick one that comes out after the client certificate has been verified, as Jorge was noting. Throw the rest away. If you get more than one, if you can use them, great. If not, pick one. Yeah, I hear this pain, and OpenSSL is something I've been fighting with for 20 years for ETLS and various implementations. I do not recommend breaking the standard in order to work with OpenSSL. I do recommend making sure that there's enough information in the standard that implementers can work with both OpenSSL and other implementers who choose to use OpenSSL without going through all kinds of code spelunking into internals.
Okay, I saw Elliot there briefly, but it looks like he may have had his question answered. All right. So if we have any other implementers on the call, it would be great to get more participation as much as we can in interop events, so we can work out issues like these with other TLS libraries as well. I think it'll be good for, obviously, for ETLS community, and I think it'll be helpful for the TLS community as well. So if there aren't any other comments, we'll move on to the next presentation.
How do we process with the application data versus close notify? There was a consensus call with no official conclusion, I think, yet.
Yeah, so I think let's, is this something that's part of your TLS 1.3, ETLS 1.3 presentation, which we'll move to next? Do you cover that in one of your?
Very protected result indicate, but not the choice really. Is not so much included, but yeah.
Okay. Well, let's make sure we cover it during that section. And I think we can take a consensus call here as well as wrap that up on the list. All right.
Good. So this is a presentation. This summarizes all the changes made since version 12, which was the version that existed at the last IETF, and then it goes through all the pull requests and issues on GitHub, as well as Alan's comments on the list the last week. My hope is that we can hopefully see that there is rough consensus on some of these things, and then we can close these issues and maybe submit a version 15, which might not be the final version, but at least we have something submitted to work. And then we can agree what we don't have consensus and what needs more work. So next slide. So most of the changes since version 12 to 14 are clarifications. There might be some normative text change, but then it's mostly that comments from people that this goes a little bit against TLS 1.3 and it should be changed. There's quite a lot of clarifications. There's security clarifications. There is clarification that the message flows are specific to TLS 1.3. There's clarification that errors are always fatal. Clarifications ticket lifetime, clarification of OCSP status, better example of encrypted usernames. I don't know. Hopefully, I assume there's consensus regarding these. Will not go through them very much more. So unless there's any comments, we go to the next slide. So here are the major technical changes that was suggested by the IETF last call directorates and mainly IESG and Ben's discuss. And Ben's discuss was partly based on input from the TLS working group. So major change was change from application data to close notify. Suggestion to update the key derivation to be more modern with different labels, as well as using type code appended to the labels instead of in the context. And these changes may or may not have working group consensus. That is part of the consensus call that you started.
Would it be a good time is this the only time you discuss these particular changes?
No, I think the key derivation will be discussed. The label, the use of context or label will be discussed on the next slide. The other two things I don't have any specific slides for. So this would be the case to discuss the use of labels, more labels at all, and the application data versus close notify.
Okay.
So I think having separate labels for MSK and EMSK instead of using the key and then splitting them into MSK, EMSK is better. Unless someone objects, I think this, at least hopefully we have some consensus of using separate labels for MSK and EMSK.
Yeah, based on the list discussion, I haven't heard anybody object to separating out the EMSK and MSK labels. But if there is, I'd like to just hear if anybody on the call has any objection to the part of the key derivation which separates out the EMSK and the MSK, not necessarily how the type code is incorporated, but at least in using a separate label for those. Okay. Well, I think what I would like to do is maybe, since it's a little bit bigger discussion, probably move the close notify discussion till the end, and then we can bring the other ones up as they come up in your slides.
Sounds good. Okay, then next slide. So I will go through them there's no particular order, but the ones in the beginning are related to the ISG discussion. So first issue number 32 on GitHub is the use of context. Was raised by you, for example, on the list of the ISG discussions. So discussion is, does it make sense to have the old where the type code goes into the context, or the 014 version where it is appended to the labels, and no context is mixed up here. It should be the opposite order. There was also a recent comment by Alan on the list that is adding things to the labels are going against the IANA register, and that this should be consulted with TLS. I personally agree with Alan that this is a bit strange, but on the other hand, I think this change was made based on feedback from people in the TLS working group. Comments?
Yeah, as far as the, I think it is a little bit problematic to include them in the label for the IANA registry. I think for ETLS, you could easily specify that the type code would be, I think you say it's a hex, so 0D or something like that, and that would be the label registered with IANA. You wouldn't register this variable label, and whoever picks up this spec to use it in, say, TTLS or FAST or some other TLS derived protocol would register their label with a different type code, which might be an advantage, in that you would make sure that you had different labels registered for each of these, and it would reduce some potential for confusion, but it also could be a disadvantage in that it makes it a little more complex.
And there's basically 3 variants on the table then, yeah.
Well, I guess maybe it will help we can agree on the exact label we register with IANA, but maybe it's better that we agree maybe on the fundamental question of whether we have a context or not. And personally, either way is fine. I think both Martin and Ben were being more pedantic, that saying it's per connection value, the context is per connection, and therefore this type code is perhaps more suitable in the label. If they approve it being in the context, I'm fine. Otherwise, having it in the label, and as Joe said, just instead of having this plus appendix, actually registering the full label, EEP_TLS_MSK_0D, for example, might make sure that there is no overlap. So yeah, I personally think just having everything in the label is fine. We could also support libraries which don't necessarily allow context, but no strong opinions. Whichever gets the document moving forward is, I guess, more important at this stage.
Yeah. Should we try to do that then, register specific labels for the different method that we know can pass ISG, and it addresses Alan's comments also that this goes against the IANA registry.
Alan?
In terms of the TLS review, per Mohit's comments that the context should be session information. The simple pushback there is no session information in EEP, right? Because EEP can go over PPP, 802.1x, anything. There's PANA, COAP now apparently. There is no session we can put into that context. So for sheer laziness, my preference would be to put the type code into the context. And that way there's less work for implementers to do. And the IANA registry doesn't have 60 things, all of which are minor variations of each other.
I agree. I think that's the best solution. That's why we had that solution from the beginning. Do we know if we can get that past Ben's discuss, or should we try to do that? That's also what have been tested in the hackathon, I guess. So should we try to go for the context again, unless Ben says that this is not okay, and then we go for different labels?
Is there anyone that objects to using the context? Roman?
Yeah, I was going to say I don't have an objection. I was going to interject kind of a process thing. it seems like a lot of work to try to rev a bunch of code if we're not sure that this is going to be an acceptable resolution. So one thing I could do is I could talk to kind of Ben and the rest of the ISG to make sure that we are comfortable with that before, again, anyone has to write code. It would be a nice step after we have that informal nod to get that verification. But I can ask first.
Yeah, I think most
Assuming
of the code.
With that.
Yeah, I think most of the code is already using the context. I mean, maybe some people have implemented both, but
yeah, no one's implemented the type code in the label. That's not done. There's no configurable flag for that. And realistically speaking, it's not huge amounts of code to change it. It's just, why have an unused field and then make your life more complicated when you can just use a field that's there?
okay, yeah. So we'll probably want to check to, obviously we don't want the document blocked on this, but it seems, at least from the list and from this discussion here, that going with the type code in the context would be the preferred approach. But it's not something that is a blocking issue if we had to change it for some other reason. All right, thanks.
Good. Next slide. So these are two pull requests based on these are based on the ISG and previous comments that we didn't miss to put into 14. So there was several comments how this document relates to Alan's documents on TLS EAP types. So now this has been added as a reference and in two sections, both in the beginning and in the key derivation. And then also a comment that these message flows, how they relate to earlier versions. So it has been added that these are example message flows specific to TLS 103. There's no issue related to these. These are only pull requests.
Okay, these seem pretty straightforward to me. I don't know if anybody has any objections to them. Okay.
Okay,
Let's
to be
move
consensus.
Yeah, if anybody has concerns here, we can voice them now. If not, and these are probably things that can be merged.
I think my plan is to try to merge and submit the version 15 for everything that there is no objection to. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll probably have to go to the list for a couple of these things.
Yeah.
But this one I think is more editorial.
Yeah. Good. So 45. So this is related to new session tickets. This was a lot of discussion during Alan's comments. So this is clear. Some guidance why resumption is needed, and also some where the new session ticket can be sent. So there was a lot of discussions why do you need resumption at all and what is beneficial for. And conclusion I think is that resumption is very beneficial in EPTLS due to the number of due to packet fragmentation. So, and then there's a correction that the ticket does not contain a PSK. It has an associated PSK to derive a PSK based on I think the identity in the ticket or the non-source. I don't remember, but it's not in the ticket. Is there any comment? I guess we can go to next.
Yeah, that one looks good. We'll go next.
And here's guidance on new session ticket. So this was first, there was discussion in ISG. Ben pointed out that the draft should mention ticket request, and that was done. Then there was comment from Alan that we should have much more guidance. And this text in green here was what was suggested on the issue in GitHub, I think by Ben or Joe, I don't remember. So that is that they should take into account that fewer new session tickets will likely be needed for ETLS. And in most cases, a single new session ticket will be sufficient. I made a pull request based on that short. I think based on Alan's comments, I think there's more guidance needed here, both security and for implementation. There was a recent comment by Alan on the list that the draft should refer to RFC 8446. I agree that that's a good idea. Then Alan also wanted to restrict it more to, or I don't, require is very restrictive. I personally don't think that's a good idea. I think, but expect here is good, and that's maybe already what is stated.
Okay, I think this is going to probably take a little bit more discussion, especially, I think what became a little clear to me in Alan's implementation report was that there are problems potentially with implementation sending new session ticket early. I have to go back and look at the TLS 1.3 spec because I'm not sure if that's a valid thing to do, because I thought the resumption key was derived from both the client and the server finished.
No.
Maybe,
but it might still be. You cannot derive the key before you have received client finish, but you can still use the ticket if you would like to, I think.
Interesting. Okay.
But I think we definitely need to sort out all the security problems here. Give guidance on that.
Yeah, I guess.
Go ahead, Mohit.
Yeah, I guess for this one, we'll need to still wait out a little bit before merging into the repository. So I think what we have conclusion is that we should say that in most cases, one session ticket is enough, and then list out that you might send more because of limitations of library, or you want to prevent extra round trips during resumption. What remains is how do we then schedule when this new session ticket is sent, because in the web scenario, there is very rarely any client authentication, whereas in ETLS predominantly there is client authentication, so you would want to issue session tickets only after receiving the client certificate and verifying it. And if libraries currently don't allow you to pick an appropriate time when to send that new session ticket, then that also needs to be documented.
Yeah. Alan?
For me, it really just needs to be documented as here be dragons, right? Otherwise, what happens is, Jorge and I and various other people working on Host AP have just been beating our heads against this for months. Exactly what does the TLS layer do? How do you control it? It's best to write all this, interoperability hackathon report stuff down and go, by the way, with TLS 1.3, almost anything can happen and you have to be aware of it. Sorry.
Yeah, and clarifying the behaviors would be helpful. Okay, any other comments on new session ticket? I think I think we've made progress on the issue of how many session tickets need to be sent. I think that we can give clearer guidance there. I think the issues of the ordering of the tickets and how those are handled is still open issues that need to be resolved.
Activity on GitHub in this issue would be appreciated. If you have anything to comment.
Yeah, it's a good point. I also posted to the list. I don't know if we had done that previously. I can't remember, but I did post where the repository is in GitHub, and I've asked the authors to use pull requests so that we can track the issues better going into the document. And having comments in the GitHub is good.
Next slide. So this is about packet modification attacks. This was raised, I think the first paragraph here was raised during the ISG discussion, and maybe also during the SEC dictorate. There was people did not understand what an attacker could modify and what. So this pull request tried to summarize what an attacker can actually modify quite a lot. And then also there was a comment from Bernard about during this discussion of protected failure, that this was important for availability. Then there has been a discussion on GitHub. I think the conclusion is that the TLS is quite, I think this academic paper about protected failures was, they try to focus too narrowly on one attack, but there's basically any number of other attacks that do the same thing. Basically, any packet you send to TLS makes it fail. So there's basically nothing we can do here, but that's probably acceptable because you can always try to connect again. And there's a comment from you on, so these two have been added to the pull request. Also a comment from you that similar text is needed on success indications, but based on the discussion between Bernard and Mohit, it seems a bit unclear exactly what and when a protected success protects against. So
Bernard?
I don't understand where it says that protected failure may be unauthenticated. The whole 3748 defines protected failure as, what does it mean to have integrity protection but are unauthenticated? They've got to be integrity protected, right?
Well, if you do opportunistic Diffie-Hellman and then use the keys from there to protect the failure indication, it's integrity protected, but you don't know who is sending, you haven't authenticated who is sending that. So in TLS 1.3, at least some of the early failure, and John, you can correct me, some of the early failure messages may be unauthenticated if you have not yet received the certificate of the other endpoint, but they will still be protected with the first Diffie-Hellman exchange or keys resulting from that.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's my understanding.
This is Alan. I think for me, the main purpose to have protected failure is it's generally good to protect your application signaling. But the only thing I really care about is that the errors get back to the end user and administrator. And protecting them seems to make the correct errors go back, right? So you get, certificate expired or whatever, rather than the ubiquitous failed and now nobody knows what to do or how to fix it. So the protection here is ensuring that it's the correct error getting back. Packet modification is just, yeah, something went wrong with the connection, which is rather a lot different than the server I trust told me that my certificate has expired.
There is an upcoming slide on must-send error, which is related to the more finding errors. Yeah.
Well, at least this text looks fine to me, and I would be at least happy to see this merged before we publish 15, but others can obviously chime in.
Okay, Elliot?
Guys, thanks for the opportunity to comment. And I think this is okay. Just to Alan's point, anytime you say errors get back to users, be careful with that one, because there might not be a user on at least one end of the connection. And if that's your goal, it's a deep rabbit hole, which I don't. Sorry.
It's possible for errors to go back. Yeah. I guess my position could be more stated as I am against the idea that no errors go back to the user, which is not proposed. But yes, requiring things going back to the user is rather too strong.
Okay, yeah, but this is otherwise. I mean, as far as it goes, it's okay. This is a really hard problem because in the context of IoT, in particular, and something I don't think anybody has a good answer for, by the way. So.
Okay, so I think the spirit of this, modification is good. I think maybe there's a little wordsmithing that maybe could go on to make sure that we're clear on what some of these things mean, but I think it should be pretty easy to resolve. Elliot, did you have more to say? Okay.
Good. Then next. So here's an issue that I opened. So TLS working group has decided, or at least they have adopted RFC 8446 bis, which changes the terminology for TLS 1.3 and TLS 1.2. And the terminology change is to remove master everywhere and replace it with main. And where master was not really needed, it's just removed. So the suggested change here is to do this before publishing, because this will be the future of TLS. So change master secret to main secret and export the master secret to export the secret. And that would be the two changes to the TLS 1.3 document. I think there has been no comments on GitHub on these proposed changes at all.
Yeah, I think it's better to align with TLS modifications now instead of having to make changes later.
Good. So this is the issue here related to the must-send error discussion we basically already had. So this is another pull request that says that you Whenever an implementation encounters a fatal error condition, it must send an appropriate TLS error alert. And also all this green text here is new. Don't know if the text was suggested by Alan or based on suggestions by Alan. But I think, yeah. And then comment on GitHub, I think from Joe, that user cancel behavior needs to be clear when we talk about error, and I agree. The problems with this is we probably need to wait on the consensus for protected indication, success or failure, before writing something about user cancelled. And then the use of user cancel in TLS 1.3 is unfortunately unclear. The specification is contradictory, and an issue has been opened for the BIS version. And the issue was opened by Ecker based on my comment. So I think there's agreement among the TLS people that this is unclear.
Okay, unless there's more discussion here, I think we'll have to see how that discussion on 8446 BIS resolves.
Good. So then here is text on the e-state machine. So this is based on suggestions first from mostly from Bernard in his mail some months ago, and then based on discussions on mostly on the list, maybe some on GitHub also. And yeah, I don't know if people have read these pull requests on GitHub, but I think to finalize this section, we would need a conclusion on what to use for protected indication, both success and failure. And this references 4137, but only in a it describes how you would implement according to 4137, but as this is an informal document, it tries to not make it normative to follow 4137. Even it seems that my understanding now is that basically all implementations are following 4137.
Yeah, I guess this is perhaps the most important and biggest issue we need to resolve is, so I think the error and failure alerts is we more or less agree on. It's mostly on the protected result indication, whether it's close notify or the 1 byte of application data.
Bernard?
Yeah, and this is probably more of a question for Alan and Jorge, but given the issues in the TLS libraries about sending a close notify, it seems like the question is closed, at least for you guys, or am I interpreting that correctly, that it really has to be the application data? Because you can't get the close notify, you can't control it.
From most of the issue is from my side in OpenSSL. I'd say it's an open question, right? I've had my guys looking into this, and it's one of these, tell OpenSSL not to do a quiet shutdown where it just closes the connection and doesn't send close notify. So it should be sending the close notify. We say, please shut down the TLS connection. It appears to. We say, is there data available to send to the other end? And the answer is no. So the question is, are we using the OpenSSL API incorrectly, or is OpenSSL 1 just completely broken here? I don't know enough to say. What I do know is sending the 1 byte of application data is a well-tested code path, not just for EAP because of PEEP and TTLS, but for TLS in general. I think we're probably running into a corner case in OpenSSL where it just doesn't expect to do the full setup and then tear it down.
I personally think application data seems like the most logical choice now when we are talking about protected success and not commitment to not send more handshake. Question, do we know that application data will work with all the other EAP methods? And do we know if application data will pass Ben's discuss? I don't think I've seen a clear answer on that, but I assume Ben would not have a problem with application data as a protected success. I think his problem was with trying to profile affecting the TLS state machine.
Yeah, so my take on that would be that the application data is an application layer signal that EAP TLS is done. And as a side effect, the EAP TLS layer promises not to do any more TLS negotiation. So you're not making a statement about the TLS layer, which is what some of that original phrasing sounded like. You're making a statement that the EAP TLS implementation and the EAP layer promises not to do any more poking of TLS. For the other EAP methods, the application data isn't necessary for normal authentication because they send their own application data. And for resumption, they're exactly the case of EAP TLS for resumption. And from a practical point, really the only difference is the EAP type code. So it works perfectly fine there. There is some caveats I'll get into later with the other EAP document, but yes, application data should be perfectly fine here.
Should we try to go for application data after checking with Ben that this will pass his discuss?
I think we should just put this in 15 with application data, and this will go back to the new IESG that gets seated, and we will see. My feeling is, if I understood Ben's previous review, was that it was mostly because we were using it as a commitment to no more post handshake messages that was causing the problem, and using it as a success indication should be fine, and it should pass through the IESG. So I don't think we should wait for that. Just do this, publish 15, and we seem to have implementations that are currently using the 1 byte of application data.
Yeah. And then I assume all alerts would be failure.
Yeah. So yeah, I think unless I think for me we have interoperable implementations with application data, and close notify. It seems like even if we can get it to work, there's a little bit of question as to how much control you will have over that message. And I also think that the IESG comment is something that was more on it, the way it was phrased to be a control how TLS was behaving than how EAP was behaving. So I think, yeah, we should move forward with that unless give anybody a chance here to voice any objections that they have to using application data instead of close notify. Okay, Hannes, I don't know if you want to say anything at the mic or not.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. No, but I would definitely look at the OpenSSL issue, and I also wanted to implement this document in embed TLS, which I didn't got to last week because the suit stuff took a little longer than I thought. Everything always takes longer than I think.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it would be great to have another implementer. So I know Alan and Jorge and folks would love to have another implementation to interact with. So that would be great.
We'll get in touch with them.
Good. Next slide. So this is about more information and in key derivation and bidding down. I think this was raised by Martin Thompson and Joe, and I think it seems to be consensus that no more additional information is needed in the key derivation. However, it seems to be consensus that the text in RFC 5216 is lacking and that more guidance is needed. And this is currently only an issue. There is no pull request. And this is, I just took the latest, here's the latest suggestion by Joe on the GitHub issue. I think we need, what is needed is maybe some high-level security requirement, which might not go into details, and then guidance on different ways how to do this securely.
Yeah, I think this will need some more discussion on the list. Probably, although it's be good to discuss here if people have views. I think currently it's a little bit uncertain how implementations behave and what we would recommend them do. But well, I guess there is some good examples that we can follow with kind of what EduRoam does. But I think we need some guidance here.
Yeah, more discussion on GitHub and or actual pull request suggestions would be welcome.
Okay.
So, and then I think this might be the last slide. So this is the summary of Alan's review that was sent in the last week. Maybe we can discuss these points one by one. The first is that it says that the document defines this with ETLS 1.3 or higher. And Alan says this is not true and all references to higher should be removed.
Well, I guess
it's run into implementation issues, as I noticed. This came up as OpenSSL started implementing TLS 1.3. Suddenly, all kinds of people complained that, hey, everything started negotiating TLS 1.3 and it doesn't work. And the answer is, oh yeah, we didn't. Neither the EAT peer nor the server side put maximum limits in the supported TLS version, and those definitely caused deployment issues. So my 2 cents here is we have no idea what TLS 1.4 is going to do. So this document, based on past pain, should suggest that we do TLS 1.3 and everybody forbids TLS 1.4 until such time as we know what that means.
Well, about this TLS 1.3 or higher, at least I'll have to double check if I'm quoting Rob correctly. From his IESG review, he was also saying that the previous ETLS document was not tied to a specific TLS version, and why is this document specifically tied to TLS 1.3? Of course, knowing that none of us, or at least I don't know what TLS 1.4 would look like. Maybe it has all sorts of post-quantum magic and whatnot, and maybe we'll have to do everything in ETLS from scratch. But if 1.4 is similar or exactly with minor modifications to 1.3, maybe we won't require another update to the TLS document, and it should be independent of the TLS version. I'm not saying I have strong opinions on this, but I also see Rob's point, at least from his IESG review, that maybe we can leave it open, and if there is a dramatic change in the next TLS version, we'll revisit and update or obsolete this.
I agree with Alan that or higher should be removed because we don't know how TLS 1.4 or 2.0 will look like. But I would prefer to keep it open, just writing that we don't know how this will work with future versions. RFC 5216 worked quite well with 3 different versions of TLS before it didn't work anymore.
Watson?
Yeah, so I think that we should look at what Quick did, a similar thing, and it seems like EAP is unfortunately very tightly tied to details of TLS in a way that a future version hopefully wouldn't be. Or, something needs to come out of this where it's like, if you're going to work on TLS 1.4, here's what you need to do to avoid all this pain again.
Yeah, I think there has been, during this work, there has been very different comments on what ETLS should be. We are having comments that ETLS should not specify anything about the TLS version at all, just the interfaces between ETLS and 1.3. And then we have comments from implementers that need to specify very much, otherwise there will be security issues. Yeah. So I think the current status is somewhere compromise between these views, probably similar to what RFC 5216 was.
Yeah, just relaying Hannes' comment that there are plenty of experts who will be there to standardize ETLS 1.4 whenever that comes. So I guess he's suggesting we drop or higher, which is, I guess, fine.
Elliot?
Yeah, so I think I think Mohit, you just captured it, right? That is definitely where I see things as well. What I was going to say though was that I think one of the things that should come out of this document is a bit more participation in the TLS working group from non-web users of TLS. I mean, I think we're feeling the pain. The group is heavily web-based, and that's all right. I mean, it's a very, very large use, but it's sort of on us a little bit to keep those guys reminded of what is necessary to implement beyond that one use case. In particular, what might be useful for the next version of TLS, which who knows when it's going to come. But it might be useful just to make sure that there's an understanding of calling interfaces for non-web use cases like TLS or other non-web use cases, maybe relating to maybe industrial cases. Hannes, I'm sure you could come up with a good zillion examples as well. So maybe just a short report once we're done, saying you guys don't forget about us the next time. Maybe even a short document if somebody wants to write it, and I'd be willing to help along those lines, because I'm sort of waiting in the wings, because I've got another document that's sort of going to have to track what you guys are doing here, and I'm just scared, quite a bit. Well, I was going to say a word I shouldn't say here, but I'm rather scared about how I'm going to proceed with that document, given what I'm trying to learn from what's going on here. So I'm sorry I've been taking a little bit too much time on this. I'll just leave it at that, though. Thanks.
Alan?
Yeah, so I'll go back a while and say that, in fact, the key exporters in TLS were defined coming out of the needs of TLS, going back to, gosh, I think it's 2516, I don't remember. The original TLS doc reached into the internals of TLS and mucked with it in order to do what TLS needed. Realistically, practically, I think if TLS, call it +1, doesn't change the key exporters, or if it doesn't change the key exporter APIs, we're probably mostly okay. The problem, the problem with TLS 1.3 is it changed the state machine. You now can do TLS negotiation after the finished message has come out, and that breaks all the EAP implementations. And the TLS working group did that for good reasons. Yeah.
Sorry, Alan. I was just going to say, I don't think EAP's the only thing that's going to break on that.
Yep. And it may happen again in the future, because realistically, what, 80% of traffic on the net is web variants, TLS variants at this point, and yeah, protocols are designed to keep them happy, and everyone else sort of has to dance around the stomping elephant.
Yeah, I guess the more people should have been active in TLS 103. I don't think it's a bit. I don't know if people were active and was voted down, or is the problem is that people were not active in the TLS 103 development.
Well, I think TLS 1.3 made some fundamental changes to the protocol that were kind of in order to reduce round trips and things like that, were sort of unavoidable in the design, that were going to cause this type of problem. And we certainly should have done better, probably, in keeping the two groups in sync, especially since you have a chair between the two groups. But that didn't happen as well as we would have liked.
Okay, should we try to move on? I think tickets we have already discussed. Bullet 3 is new peer authentication, adds new peer authentication. I don't think that's true. New peer authentication was allowed before. What is added is a figure.
Just note that Section 5 doesn't discuss the security implication, of not authenticating the peer. If you're doing EAP-TLS with allegedly client certs and then not implementing the peer, there are certainly use cases for that, but it has to be discussed that you shouldn't be giving these people wide open access to your network.
Elliot, are you still in the queue? Bernard.
That hand forgets to go down. Sorry.
Yeah, I think Alan makes a good point, because there have been security vulnerabilities in that area that have been discovered. So you have to be very, very careful about managing resumption. You don't want somebody resuming from a no peer authentication to a session where it's assumed the peer's authenticated.
Yep.
Yeah, any guidance here how to improve security for this would be very helpful. I'm not against that. I think that these documents add peer authentication. I think it's not correct. But any guidance on this? Maybe someone can suggest something based on. Seems like this is sounds like this is security problems that are known and what to do with them.
Yeah, we should open up an issue for these.
Yep. Then backwards compatible, the document doesn't say how this is. I think this tries to refer to the TLS version negotiation. That should probably be clarified. Don't know.
Just one or two sentences. One or two sentences of we rely on TLS, and oh, by the way, there's nothing in the EAP TLS headers to allow any kind of version negotiation.
Good. Good. Then we have next is hello retry request. Alan says no explanation of how this affects EAP-TLS, but also a suggestion that it doesn't appear to affect EAP-TLS. So hello retry request is new in TLS 1.3. I think we need to allow that. I don't think either that its effects. I think if there is any effect, I would be happy to add that to the document if somebody makes a PR or suggests something on the list. Then next bullet. Yeah.
No, that's I said okay. Yep.
And next is EAP identity. Alan says that suggestion should be to use the same EAP identity from the first full authentication. And he says this solves a number of potential privacy and interoperability issues. I personally don't really see how this solves privacy issues. It's like sending something twice could cause privacy issues. Also comment that I think 5G specification will send the same clear text identity but encrypted so that they on the wire they would be different.
Yeah, this is a change from some of my earlier comments of using the TLS PSK identity in the EAP identity. I think in the end, EAP TLS can probably just rely on the TLS layer to say, hey, you have session tickets, whatever magic goes on in TLS, this session has been authenticated and has been tied to a previous user session. It just seems to me that there's no real benefit to using this encrypted TLS PSK identity in the EAP identity field. You might as well just use @realm all the time, and it makes things simpler.
Watson?
So I just want to point out that, or Watson like Cloudflare, I just want to point out that in Resumption, your implementation has to keep track of the credentials used if you want to have a notion of user identity. So if you resume a session and you don't store the client certificate, you don't have it in the resumed session. And so while it's true that the you need to have some way of storing this in a ticket. So it might not always be possible, depending on what implementations do and how they're hooking into OpenSSL. I suspect that this is part of the issues that we're seeing with session tickets, where it's, you know, I looked at RFC 84446, and you can't send a session ticket until after you've sent the finished on your end. And if that session ticket, for whatever reason, doesn't contain the credentials that were used, and later you're trying to verify and you're not sure whether resumptions happen or not, then you can run into issues.
I don't really understand the comment here about PSK identity and identity response in EAP. I don't think the document says that you should do that. I think the only sentence I can find is that says that PSK identity is unsuitable for use in the identity response.
Okay, so I'll double check that. And for previous comments, yeah, this is what EAP server implementations have been doing for quite a while, is caching all the policy information from the original authentication and reapplying it and reevaluating it during resumption. And that gets into the other issue of no peer authentication, where if you don't have an identity, arguably you probably shouldn't do resumption too, because you can't apply policies.
I think we open an issue for this identity. Then next bullet is it defines key exporters for other TLS-based EAP methods. The working group already have a document which covers this topic, except as working group document prior to these changes. I don't think this document specifies key exporters for other methods. I think it specifies a key exporter for IETF110-EMU-202103, and I think the working group agreement, as I remember it, was that it should define only for IETF110-EMU-202103, but define something that could be used as specified in other documents for other methods. I don't really know what you want. What kind of change you want here, Alan?
The thing is, the text in the document explicitly says it defines these exporters for other methods. And if we're going to keep this to TLS, just EAP TLS, it should just define its exporters for EAP TLS as, I think you had made these changes already in an earlier slide, and then simply point to the other document and go, hey, there's similar things elsewhere.
Yeah, I think the version in GitHub might be better already. Yeah. Otherwise,
okay.
Please comment on that. Yeah, and the last thing is additional, leaves a lot to be implementation defined. Yes, we can try to add more guidance before publishing this. Otherwise, I think this is the last.
All right, great. I think we should open up GitHub issues for most of these, or the ones that we still need to have more discussion on, which I think is most of them. And then I think most of these will be relatively straightforward to resolve. A couple of them maybe take some more discussion. All right. I suggest we move on to the next agenda item that took a little bit longer than what we had thought. So EAP-based other TLS-based EAP types.
Yeah, so there's only one slide here. I think there's been substantive discussions on any of the important topics elsewhere, specifically in the implementation report. In short, things mostly work. Resumption is easy. OpenSSL is horrible. And the question is, what text do we put in to go, hey, would like to fix OpenSSL, but we can't. So here are the corner cases that you have to worry about. And as Jorge was noting earlier, these corner cases are specific more to PEEP and TTLS than to ETLS, which seems to be pretty much okay at this point.
One of the things I'd like to see is more discussion on this particular document and the other EAT methods as we're going through these ETLS issues, because these discussions may have implications on these other documents. It would be good to get those out now so that we can get this document maybe out at the same time or at least shortly following ETLS. So I encourage people to read this document, and maybe we can get some comments on this as well. Any particular comments on in the group today? All right, then let's move on to, I think, what is our next topic, which is RFC 3748 BIS. Yarian.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right. So this is the BIS document for 3748, which was published 17 years ago. And you can see obviously the draft is in the IETF directories, but you can see the difference to the original RFC in this arco.com link. And if you go to the next slide. So what are we about to do? Well, the first thing is that you should not panic. We're not doing something horrible here. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with the existing RFC. It's pretty good. And we are also not changing the protocol. However, there are some updates that we could do. If you go to the next slide. So there's some potential things we could do. We could fold in errata or other issues observed over the years. We could probably update the security bits quite a bit, because we think about security in different ways today than we did in 2001 when the work on this current RFC started. We also have published several core EAP protocol documents since the publication of this RFC, and they aren't pointed to by this RFC. We could have an opportunity to put in some more references. The authors of this particular update thought that it would be a good idea to change one or two of the terms. We'll talk about that in a bit. We could update the references, and I guess overall there's nothing earth-shattering here. We could go on, but there's opportunities to clean up and provide more information. You could think about this like your car's a yearly maintenance, and if you didn't do the yearly maintenance in 17 years, there's quite a few dents in the car that you maybe should have fixed, and some of that might actually give you some headache. Next slide, please. So the specific updates, and I don't want to spend too much time on any of these, but I'll just very briefly mention what this is about. So there's actually one errata, a minor thing that's fixed here. A bigger thing is that obviously we know now more about the various EAP methods and some of the algorithms. So for instance, there's some text on MD5 and so on, and the issues with that. We also point to the newer methods because we felt that that's reasonable. We added one security claim. Remember, there's a set of security claims requested for all methods. We added one. I could discuss if that's the right one or if other things could be added, but we did add one. We also refer to these other base or core EAP documents like the state machine, the keying document, and so on. The terminals change is kind of analogous to what John was talking about in the TLS side of things. So master changed to main. Yeah, not a huge deal. It's not one of those master-slave type of terminology issues, but we felt that this would be better. We've updated the references. We discuss also, I mean, the original RFC discusses mostly IEEE networks as a use case, but in this new version, there's a little bit of text also on 3GPP. We made a change on may to should on omitting the peer name portion of the NII in EAP edited response, one part of the document, and updated the IANA rules. And if you go to the next slide, so there's some open questions as well. Likely you could say more about security. We did not make a full listing of all the attacks and everything that we've learned since then. That might actually be a useful exercise. And also, since we do have some of those other documents, part of the core EAP specifications, it might be that some parts of this document could be thinner and point to those other RFCs, maybe, or maybe that's not good because we want to keep things self-contained. The IEEE references and discussions are fairly dated, I felt, or we felt. Could probably update that. And finally, there's a comment around passwords and passphrases in general for all EAP methods, and they point to SASL prep and some of these international character set issues. And that reference is like very old and it's been updated 2 or 3 times to newer RFCs. And I did not at least know what to do with this. I don't know if the old RFC still is valid. It should be replaced by whatever was replaced in the IETF, or it's some other discussion that should be had here. But that's clearly an open issue. And then next slide, which is the final slide. So basically, this is for your consideration. We took a first cut. Would love to hear what we missed, or we went possibly too far. And the question is, should we do an update? And if we want to do an update, what should be put there? Thank you. Opening up for discussion.
Bernard.
Yeah, so usually what happens with something that's 17 years old is you try to advance it to the next stage of the standards process, which would involve things like implementer surveys, addressing known interop issues, and I'm not seeing any of that here. So I do have a concern about it, which is that I don't think it's actually bringing the draft forward in the way that the standards process describes.
Okay, so are you concerned that we did not document the implementation experience, or that there isn't implementation experience?
Well, usually, I'm not sure that usually what you do, right, for the standards process is you try to document that everything has 2 implementations or more, and potentially find areas that weren't implemented or interop issues that were encountered. That's what the advancement process specifies. It's not just, especially if something's 17 years old, we don't really rev RFCs for the reasons you describe, right? Just to change, update references. There is no yearly maintenance process in the IETF. It's usually for the process of it. Well, again, you're changing the standards process. You're not describing the standards process we have. You're describing a standards process you want to have happen. But I'm just saying that there are things that you do to advance that aren't in this, and it is a lot of work. People often don't like to do it, but that would be an implementer focused thing that you'd have to get into, and maybe some testing. As an example, I often wonder how things work in practice when you use the non-standard EAP type space. You know, is that interoperable between implementations? Those are things I don't know that we fully tested. So there actually may be things in 3748 that actually, it's possible there are things that just don't work.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in general, I'd love to have that sort of thing here. I do think, though, that there's two categories of things that we can update RFCs for. And one is this implementation experience, and the other one is new information and fixes to documents. And both are valid reasons, and we usually fold documents in that have both components. But I'm not disagreeing with you. I agree that would be a wonderful thing to have. This is a 0.0, so we don't have a lot of that, a lot of the material in it yet.
Mohit?
Sorry, I was a little distracted. Apologies for that. Yari or Joe, could you go back to the slide? I don't know, one slide or yeah, this one. So about 8. Now I'm. So what would happen when we use encrypted identifiers if we are now saying should omit the peer name portion? So I know 3GPP uses encrypted identifiers, and if we are going to say should omit, isn't that an issue, or am I missing something here?
John, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think you might have a point. Maybe this should be updated to be a bit more descriptive, that you should hide the identity peer name instead of saying should remove it. Yeah. I think both approaches are okay. The important thing is that you hide the identity for any attacker.
Agreed, but I guess in some EAP methods or in some deployments, you might still have the username portion and still have privacy, whether it's encrypted identifiers or random identifiers. This was just a minor comment. I was a little bit distracted with the chat. The other question, I guess, would be, and this is like, I haven't thought this through fully, and up to you, Yari and John, on how you see it. But at least in EAP TLS, when we started updating for TLS 1.3, we realized that two things would be very helpful. Save some round trips was if we can add a payload to EAP success and make the EAP success protected, because most EAP methods export keys, and you will have keys to protect that message. And if you could send the new session ticket, for example, in the EAP success, or send other types of configuration data. So I remember there was a presentation from Huawei to do that. I know this would be a much bigger change than what is intended, but something that at least you could consider as input from me to look into whether it makes sense to do it in this version or wait for another version. No strong opinions.
Okay. Roman?
Wanted to jump in with a process kind of commentary on what we had just talked about what we standardize. So ignoring some of the details of what's on the screen right now, because I think those changes fall into a lot of different categories of what you're doing. But I would say the conversation of how we do protocol maintenance varies across kind of the IETF. And I think that there's two different things to consider here. There is the conversation around how do we document implementations and how do we elevate things from PS to higher levels of standard. And that's one level of administrative kind of bureaucracy. And then the other element of kind of bureaucracy is, what triggers Abyss? Is that in Charter to trigger kind of Abyss? Does that change kind of the protocol? And I would say the idea of collecting a package of errata, certainly that are areas where we don't have a lot of clarifications and we jam that into Abyss without necessarily changing a protocol version number is something that's been done before. And also, if we want to elevate the document itself to a higher standard, we would need a revised version anyway of the core spec itself, because we wouldn't want to leave any of the kind of ambiguity hanging out there. So I think we need to go point by point to kind of decide what category things fall into and how dramatic of a change that is. And we should probably squint at that relative to the charter about whether we're really changing the protocol itself or creating an extension. So this is a 0-0, so we're quite early here. Thanks.
Elliot?
Yeah.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Hey there, Joe, and thanks. And thanks, Yari, for the draft. I want to say that I totally appreciate your car analogy in terms of maintenance, which leads me to want to ask a bunch of questions which are probably inappropriate for the working group. But what I did want to ask is, if we're going to go to these lengths, if we're going to open up a BIS document, is it worth stepping back a little bit and asking the question, at more general levels, are there things we really ought to be doing differently? And I mean, it's a very lengthy conversation, right? And maybe we should be testing, what are we protecting, what are we not protecting? Is the connection model still appropriate? Is the model we're using still appropriate for tunneling? These are all questions that I think it's at least worth considering if we're talking about doing a BIS for this. And which is to say, I'm perfectly fine if we come down with the answers and say, yeah, I think we're really comfortable with where we are, just a couple of tweaks here and there, and we have ourselves a full standard. I would be very happy with that, but I would like us to, before we go to the effort of turning something into a full standard, is it what we want at the end of the day? And to give you just one example of the applicability, and we should be thinking about that, is the applicability good across not just 3GPP and 802 networks? Are there is there other applicability that we should be considering in answering that question? And I'm not trying to prejudge the answer. I'm just saying I think we should be asking some of these questions. All right, thanks.
Yeah, it's a good question, of course. We set out from the point of view of not changing the protocol, but you could certainly consider providing a sort of a EAP next generation type of thing. Whether that's sensible or not is obviously a different and maybe a bigger discussion. But you might also have, like, both answers are valid situation where you want to keep your documentation up to date and so on, and you might also work on some newer stuff. But there's a weight in deployed systems, and that was basically our rationale for mostly worrying about the protocol as is and describing it correctly, than updating or changing the protocol. Yeah, one more thing on this discussion started by Bernard and what Roman said. I think the awareness of what's working and what's not working would be really good to have. There's also a category that I did not see anyone mention yet, which is, maybe there's some parts that we could just deprecate because, this is not up to today's standards anymore. Particularly if it's not today anymore performed because of some reason.
Yeah, I don't know, Mohit, did you have any, or Roman, are you guys still in the queue?
Oh no, I just thought that we are now running like 2 minutes, and I don't know if we'll have time to discuss the milestones, but no more comments on this draft.
Yeah, I think we'll have to take the milestones offline, and I think we'll want to have more. Thank you for bringing this, Yari. I think we'll want to have more discussion of this on the list, and to kind of figure out what exactly the target will be here. And I think also the milestone discussion will be timely because likely we'll have to figure out if this fits in the EMU charter and you know what. I think some of that will depend on where we think we want to go with this document or this effort. So anyway, I think we're just about out of time. So thanks for joining the meeting today, and see you next time.
Yeah, I guess you'll find some of us in the gather town, so have a great rest of the IETF.